This is Secure Cyber Connect podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson, where we're joined today by information and cybersecurity technology and talent acquisitional professionals who share their journeys, unique perspectives, and offer advice and guidance. Today, we're joined by Kewal. Kewal is a seasoned IT and security professional specializing in cloud security. He currently serves as the head of InfoSec for Beekeeper, a rapidly growing software as a service company that's revolutionizing technology for frontline workers. With a strong background in leading operational teams, Kewal has also successfully delivered large strategic initiatives for multinational companies during his tenure at many of the big four consulting firms. Kewal, welcome to the Secure Cyber Connect podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Jay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So, Kewal, I suppose typically with all of our guests, we're always going to ask a couple of cursory questions to kick things off. And the first one is, what brought you here today?
Firstly, I'm honored to be on this platform to share my insights and knowledge. But I have had my career background mostly spans in IT and security. And then as part of that, most of my time I've spent in security. And over the last 5 years or so, especially, my specialization has been mostly in the cloud space. And in this time, I've seen a lot of company really go from, we don't understand cloud is too insecure, there is too much risk involved, to we need to move to cloud. Yeah, and I would be very happy to share that insight, to share my perception on how things have evolved, and also maybe share some challenges and ways of addressing those challenges.
Would you be kind enough to sort of share something with us that within your career that you're proud of that maybe isn't on your CV or on your LinkedIn profile?
Yep. So something I am very passionate about is providing mentorship and support to students and young professionals who are perhaps just starting in their career. This is something I do as part of different student development programs, for example. And it is also something rather personal, because I remember when I was in that position, in a way, I tried to give back by taking on that role of the mentor that I wish I once had and the guidance and advice I once wish I received.
That's brilliant. And yeah, that selflessness is something that we're seeing throughout cybersecurity, where you're individuals such as yourself, you're trying to open the door open for the next generation of talent. Well, that's something that we can certainly circle back to at the top of this session.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also generally, I'd say in tech and security community in general, there are so much things that is very difficult to grasp of or just know until you know that from somehow or from someone. As part of that, it's not just me sort of getting my experience and knowledge, but many often I also get to learn a lot from their perspective and how things are evolving for next generations. And ultimately, it is just a really great, rewarding feeling when you contribute to somebody's success.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that the industry needs more and more of. And as we've discussed in previous conversations, Kewal, we're seeing, thankfully, that is starting to creep in more across the cyber sector. So what do you feel is what's your take on the current state of cloud security, and how do you think it's evolving in the market?
Yeah, so if we look holistically across the industries, the situation, I would say, is quite interesting. But I think it makes sense for a bit of a history talk to really understand how we got to this state. So looking back, it was maybe around early to mid 2010s when cloud really began to pop up as this next technology for digital transformation. And initially, as with any new technology, there was a lot of reluctance to migrate to cloud for several reasons. First, it was simply due to lack of understanding of how this new technology works. And at the same time, many companies were simply against the change that involved so much complexities. And then if we look at more regulated companies and industries, it was really difficult to accept this notion of giving your data to a third-party cloud provider and then storing it in a public cloud service. Then sort of the mid-2010s, and this was a really interesting time in my career. There was all of a sudden, this massive spike in cloud adoption, because this was when companies really started understanding the benefits of the technology And also the robustness of the infrastructure were much more mature to support transition into cloud. And in this period, in sort of space of 5 years, I would say, I really saw it go from there is no way we're ever moving into cloud to what companies now dub the cloud first strategy, meaning everything to the cloud. Yeah, so that is the strategy that many of the companies today are adopting to stay competitive and then get ahead with the digital transformation. But the way this transition happened, and for most part is still happening, is like with any other digital transformation initiative. There is now this new hot topic for the management team. And when it comes to security, you almost immediately forget about all the files that are already burning, and you put all your emphasis on this next groundbreaking innovation. So what does that mean for the security team? Well, the company now starts accelerating at 60 kilometers an hour, while the security team stays behind trying to catch up at 45 kilometers an hour. Yeah. Right? So they never really get the opportunity to catch up as the business keeps that pace for a while. And as a result, security simply falls behind. And part of that, the amount of security incidents simply in the cloud space we have seen in the last 5 years, so it's frankly countless.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think people are learning from this? Or do you see that sort of that this is, I guess, in terms of the advancements, the way the market's going, do you think people are learning from these experiences and mistakes, if you will?
Yeah, for us, that is one of the positive takeaways. And this is a very well-known case in security in general, that only when it affects you, then you really feel it and you really learn from it, right? And in the industry in general, I would say we have learned a lot from these incidents. And the industry is increasingly recognizing the importance of understanding security risks. The rise in new regulations, data privacy requirements has also certainly contributed to this shift. And as a result, the perspective on the importance of security today, I would say, is far more mature than what it was 5 years ago. And so sort of in summary, most companies today, they do acknowledge that security is a genuine concern and a significant business risk. However, they often view it as an insurance policy, so necessary, but not something that directly drives revenue or business growth. Yeah. So this leaves the security team still fighting an uphill battle. The companies haven't yet grasped that security is not just an insurance, but it's an essential investment. In a way, it's a way to hedge against digital risk, especially for initiatives like cloud migration. Yeah. And in most cases, what I've seen is security investment is still minimal. It is just enough to meet the basic regulatory requirement or certification standards, but nearly not enough to support the foundation for a sustainable business growth.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, we're seeing quite a lot of that sort of industry, right? A lot of organizations are guilty of perhaps being reactive in terms of your security posture as opposed to proactive. However, there are a lot of clients that you work with and your security leaders and partners that are taking more of a proactive approach now, which is, of course, encouraging. But something that myself and Jay have noticed in most recent times is that organizations claim to be going on this cloud native journey, but they're not actually truly cloud native. What would you best describe as an organization in terms of cloud native versus a mixture of both? How would you best define that?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting concept because it will mean different things for different organizations based on how the business has developed over the years, right? So Beekeeper, we are this wave of new companies that are fully established in the cloud, right? So now these new companies, especially in the tech space, there is no IT physical infrastructure, right? So in a way, you can classify that as being cloud native. Yeah. But for older companies that have grown significantly and that generally the corporations and the enterprises today, for them, cloud native means slightly different. For them, cloud native is a strategy that allows you to be more, let's say, competitive in this new digital era or in this new digital age by leveraging the benefits of the cloud. Yeah. So it is going to be very difficult for large corporations and enterprises to be fully cloud native. That is not going to be a reality in the next decade or so. So that concept, for some companies, it is, we are just established on the cloud. We have no IT physical hardware, right? And for other companies, it is everything we do now, our business processes, we migrate into cloud and see where it lands in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I think the legacy systems always offer a challenge for businesses, and it's about balancing business as usual with innovation, and sort of cloud is obviously a great route for that.
Yeah, and with cloud came many innovation that is taking the world or sweeping the world with it, right? So the whole topic around AI is enabled by cloud, for example. For tech companies, the whole DevOps processes and how you make the software development lifecycle more efficient and better is also enabled by cloud. So in many ways, it is, you simply not use the benefits of cloud. Yeah, if you're a company that has a strategy not to use cloud at all, then you're really struggling. You're really going to struggle in that space. And of course, there are these legacy systems, especially for banks and so on, the mainframes and the financial services that cannot be just switched over, right? Not just in cloud, even in like physical infrastructure, it just cannot transition that quickly and with that simplicity. So it is important to really address what disadvantages and advantages you have with cloud. And it is also really important to just look at where your business stands today, maybe how the rest of your competitors are doing, and then derive a strategy that fits for your current landscape.
Yeah, makes sense. And just one sort of last question on that topic. What would you say the main driver is for organizations at the moment to transition to cloud? What has been the motivation there?
Yeah, I think agility, cost, and efficiency are perhaps some of the main drivers, and we see this in all areas. So if I take tech companies, for example, right, in the past, if you want to deploy your software or if you want to increase the capacity for your already deployed software, it takes weeks for IT team to procure a new hardware, then configure it, and then prepare it so that your development team can deploy your application to that, right? That can now be done in literally minutes, right? So this gives the companies a lot of efficiency, but also it is usually done at a reduced cost of what you would traditionally spend. So there is a huge business benefit, not just in terms of reaching your customers in a, let's say, more accessible way in the cloud, but also making your processes more efficient, easy to execute, and spend less cost on resources along the way.
Yeah, makes sense. And would there be a reason why organizations perhaps shouldn't transition or fully embrace cloud native at this point in time? What are some key reasons to push back clients would be?
Yes, one of the key concept of cloud that many companies have found difficult and are still finding difficult to address is giving your data to a third-party provider without really fully understanding how that data is going to be managed, processed, or secured. And to make that decision even more complicated, there are now privacy regulations or certain industry-related regulations where there are very strict requirements in terms of how data can be processed. And largely, many companies are still trying to navigate this ecosystem of what you're allowed to do in the cloud versus what you're not, and when are you going to be breaching certain regulatory requirements, and when are you going to be breaching certain contractual obligations.
Yeah, and I think that these are highly crucial, important aspects of sort of third-party risk management, and I think it says relying on external providers for SaaS solutions in things like certainly contractual and legal considerations and policies and procedures, general vendor reputation, reliability. I think these are incredibly important parts of the discussion.
Absolutely, yes. And I guess third-party risk management process, this whole TPMM topic, the supply chain topic, has evolved, and it is now even more important than in the past, mainly because of how many supply chain incidents we have seen in the recent time. And now the implication of this incidents, let's say the SolarWinds, for example, or the recent CrowdStrike, the implication has been so big that companies are finally waking up and realizing that, hey, in this hyper-connected environment, third-party risk is a real issue that not only affects your company, but it actually affects a big landscape of critical infrastructure, your customers, and everything to do with your customers, right? So TPRM is becoming a more and more important topic, and it is also really a crucial topic to address if we want to build a sustainable world.
And what do you feel the best approach is in challenging these risks, though? I mean, since maybe things like vendor selection process or all the contractual agreements, how do you feel the best approach is served?
Yeah, so there are internal aspects, and then there is this external third-party service provider. And so when it comes to the external third-party service provider, it essentially boils down to trust, right? So how much trust can you place on this third party to secure your data? And how can you verify that the third party is providing you with a reliable SaaS service that may be used for some very critical business operations? And that level of verification required to determine, or the level of verification required to determine that trust, for example, in your TPRM process, is typically based on two factors, right? The first is, what is the nature of the data that is going to be shared with the third party? For example, does it involve customer data? Or is it personally identifiable information? And does it have any kind of regulatory requirements or contractual obligations associated with it? Secondly, what is also really important is to understand the criticality or the business impact of this SaaS service. So what would happen if the SaaS service was to go down, maybe temporarily or even permanently? From a third-party risk management TPRM perspective, understanding these two factors is crucial for assessing the overall risk level, because only when you have a clear grasp of these elements can you then build the right mitigation strategy and try to minimize the potential risk involved.
Absolutely. And how would you mitigate most of these risks aside from that suggestion you just made? How else would you mitigate these risks?
So as part of the TPRM process, many companies follow, I would say, a standard framework or a standard procedure that is accepted. And so for many companies, this would be sending out a form of security questionnaire that you want to evaluate and sort of assess if there is going to be, or assess how your third-party SaaS service provider is executing the security processes. But before you can even get to that stage, there is an underlying challenge for the IT and security team. And that is, for most companies, there is not the required setup that gives you enough governance and visibility over your SaaS landscape, right? So if you're in the IT and security team, the story is very simple. You cannot protect something that you don't know you have. Yeah. So in theory, it should be very straightforward, right? So you should keep tabs in all the SaaS services you buy, and you account for the data that's being uploaded and how critical the services are. But the complexities are quite difficult to manage sometimes, because many of the times the businesses are simply going out there and using numerous SaaS services. Yeah, and that, I would say, is perhaps one of the biggest advantages, but also one of the biggest challenges of a SaaS service, is that it is so easy to access, right? It is so easily accessible in a web browser with an internet connection. So really, to start in this mitigation process, the first thing that really needs to be in place is that governance structure and that company awareness, the awareness within the business teams, and that setup that allows IT and security team to be part of these discussions and initiatives where a new SaaS service is in question.
No, it makes sense. And from a questionnaire standpoint, you're certainly seeing a lot of organizations now trying to automate and semi-automate that just to reduce the downtime of some security teams and being able to communicate from business to business. Is that something that you feel is going to continue to evolve and organizations are going to continue to adapt? Or do you think there always needs to be that human touch in questionnaire stage?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, because a topic that's almost already burning topic amongst security teams, especially in the SaaS space, because we are a SaaS service provider and we have thousands of customers, and on a regular basis we are bombarded with hundreds of questions, right? So first thing, before we even get to that stage, I think it's very critical to balance, and it's a very delicate balance, but it is really essential. And that balance is the comprehensiveness or the amount of effort and resources you put into a security questionnaire versus business efficiency and actual value you're getting out of that process, right? So we are at this stage now where companies are recognizing the risks associated with SaaS applications and cloud services in general. There was, I think, a very recent report from Forbes that highlights 70% of the enterprises are now prioritizing SaaS security. And in the same report, it goes on to say the investment in SaaS security last year, 2023, grew by nearly 40%. Yeah. So we have seen that, not just in the industry, but we've been part of it firsthand at our company at Beekeeper with the number of security questionnaires we see that is coming our way. And as part of that, we are trying to, let's say, make that process more efficient by maybe having knowledge bases, getting help of AIs and so on, right? It is a part that is evolving. And I don't think it matters so much whether there is ultimately humans involved or AI involved, just to put it into the mix. I think where companies are really struggling is setting up a TPRM process that is fit for purpose in the context of their business. As I said, companies are utilizing various frameworks and standard processes for TPRM. However, these frameworks often prove to be too generic, so failing to align with the business context. And most often, the process itself is overly cumbersome, whereby it is not really helping the business move at all. And it just creates a bottleneck for all the parties involved.
Yeah. Kewal, shadow IT and shadow SaaS, for instance, has been a major issue for a number of security leaders that we've been speaking with, especially when they're going for that discovery phase, trying to get an understanding of their environment. What best practices would you sort of suggest or advise to organizations when they are going through that review period to identify what shadow SaaS looks like, or even shadow IT within their organization?
Yeah, so shadow IT traditionally has been one of the biggest issue for the IT team. And that issue is only made even bigger with this whole introduction of SaaS landscape and the ease of SaaS applications and how quickly you can get started with those. Many companies struggle at this point because I would say primarily it's the business culture. That things like this really needs to be at the DNA of the company, and it is something that does not come easy. So what we typically see is policies and governance framework around what business teams should be doing when they want to get a new SaaS application, right? So the process they should follow. But the reality is for many business teams, it is just using another website, right? So you go to another website, create new username, password, pay with company credit card, and you get started. Yeah. So that process gets completely undermined.
How do you deal with sort of poorly configured security solutions by these providers, and how do you deal with that?
When it comes to configuration, one thing that should be very clear, and I say should because many companies still don't fully grasp it, is the cloud shared responsibility model, right? So it's a fundamental concept that defines role and responsibilities when it comes to different categories of cloud services. And as a SaaS service customer, your responsibility typically lies with the classification of data that you choose to upload and the access controls around it. And most of the configuration aspects, especially around infrastructural components, are completely managed by the SaaS service provider. And this is where it becomes slightly more challenging because you just have to trust to some aspect and rely on the SaaS service provider doing the right thing. And this is where having that effective TPRM process can give you the required confidence. And there are, however, ways to address this lack of visibility and control through other actions, such as audits, if your contractual agreement allows for it, conducting pen tests, for example, with your internal teams or external pen testers, and also procuring tools that give you the status of the security posture of the given SaaS service. And here I'm talking about things like SaaS security posture management tools or attack surface management solutions, but these things cost. And in reality, very few security teams are actually provided with the budget and the required resource to implement these measures.
In terms of contractual safeguards, let's talk around sort of dealing with some of the challenges of SLAs and contracts of SaaS providers when it comes to security requirements, things like security clauses or the right to audit.
Yes, that is a really good one, because this is exactly when I'm very grateful to have a really great and competent legal team. And so shout out to my legal team on that one. So from a security standpoint, when it comes to the contract, we are mostly concerned with the section in the DPA data processing agreement that is often called the terms or technical and organizational measures, and sometimes it's constructed in a slightly different way, right? But this section generally outlines the responsibilities and obligation of the SaaS service provider, primarily in relation to security of PIs. Sometimes this can be mutually agreed, but many times there is very little room for negotiations. So it is really important to make sure the terms is adequate, because they are contractually binding. So it gives some kind of accountability to your service provider. But I would say the terms and condition in the contract should never be your primary security measure, right? It should really be just a small check in your overall TPRM process, because regardless of what is in the contract, if a breach happens, a breach has happened, right? A contractual words or statement in the contract is not going to prevent that breach.
Do you feel that you should always ensure that a contract grants you the right to perform audits and assessments of the vendor's environment and estate?
And so this goes slightly back to one of the statements I made, which is around the comprehensiveness of the TTRM process. Yeah. So at Beekeeper, we see it firsthand. Our customers regularly send us questionnaires, and some of them are literally 400 to 500 questions long. Yeah. And this is something I have seen firsthand when working with clients when I was in consulting, is that, they send out this questionnaire, but it is rarely ever reviewed. Yeah? And even if it's reviewed, then it is not done with the level of scrutiny that it really requires. Yeah? So what ends up happening is you have this different classification of third-party systems carrying different risk exposure, but then you're kind of throwing in the same 500 questions for every application, right? And yes, maybe for an application that is absolutely critical to your business, maybe 500 questions is justified, right? But if there's a low-risk application that does not really impact your business so much, what is the point of executing that 500 questions and then trying to look at 500 questions and answers in an Excel spreadsheet? Yeah. So specifically coming back to right to audit, I think this can be really important and is perhaps crucial at times if you are procuring a SaaS service that is fundamentally going to bring your business down, right? And maybe as part of internal policies and as part of internal assurance, you do want to get that actual assurance of how the third party is managing the security and how your data is being processed and secured. Yeah. So I would say it is important, not in all cases.
Okay.
Something that I've seen your organizations perhaps grappling with over the last sort of 12 to 24 months is when they are sort of you going through these processes and putting things in place, filling out the questionnaires. It's actually just a measurement of a point in time. That point in time might be sort of 3 or 4 months ago. It doesn't obviously reflect the current security maturity posture. So where do you see that sort of potentially changing in the future? Do you think automation, AI, to play a role in sort of combating that and ensuring that things that are reported accurately?
Yeah, so one thing we've seen pop up in the last, I'd say 3 years maybe, is something that we call the Trust Center. And so a Trust Center is essentially a portal or a website where you actively provide information around your security posture. So things like policies, the kind of certification your company has. And that becomes let's say, a way of actively sharing updates to your security posture. However, for companies today, the evaluation or the re-evaluation process is sort of time boxed or is scheduled on an annual basis or biannual basis, right? So as part of these policies for TTRM, you usually would only reassess or reevaluate maybe in a year's or 2 years' time. And to some extent, that is acceptable and understandable, because you also do not want to be doing a third-party risk assessment for the same vendor every 3 months, right? So this is when automation can certainly help, but also having a very good process that balances your risks with the level of, or the amount of assessments you need and the level of assurance you need versus the risk that the third party is carrying.
Rewind a second and let's talk a little bit about, and maybe to sort of wrap up the session, is talk about worst case scenario. Let's talk about the termination of a contract, or maybe the returning of data or destruction of data. Give us your take on you feel like the best approach to that, or if that is indeed an oxymoron, how you would deal with that in an event.
Yeah, so we see companies have different approaches to this, both in terms of what data you request and as a customer, and the kind of data retention policy you would like to have as a customer, versus the services that the SaaS company would provide you in terms of how configurable it is for you to set your own retention policies. And so I think this is largely driven by, firstly, regulations around how much or how long certain data needs to be kept in what format and how, as well as internal policies that dictate this is our data retention policy, and after this period, the data needs to be gone. This is typically done in 2 manners, or 3 manners, I would say. First one, many SaaS providers, when you delete data in their service, in their environment, they will keep a backup, right? And they'll keep a backup for a certain date. When your data is deleted from the main production environment, the backup remains for 30 to 60 days, depending on the backup configuration. And then your data retention becomes 30, 60 days after deletion, right? But what most companies, SaaS companies especially, do is they have this policy of, this is customer data, we don't touch customer data, right? Customer is responsible for deleting, processing, or uploading those data into the platform, right? In a way, it is not rightfully the SaaS company's task to delete that data at regular interval unless the customer has agreed to it, right? And some SaaS company may say every 2 years we delete your data, but many SaaS companies would say we keep your data until you tell us to delete it.
And I guess just to finish off, Kewal, is there anything else that you feel it's worth shining a light on at this stage that you may be interested in sharing with the audience?
Yeah, I think I can, from experience, I can share a couple of points. And the first one I'm really keen on is short-term fixes for long-term success cannot continue. And I know we see this all the time. Instead of really addressing the root cause and fixing the security issue or the problem that's at hand, companies are always trying to find out the cheapest way to make the situation acceptable for that point in time. Yeah, the long-term it simply does not work. And the second thing I would say is security has to move in line with business growth, if not faster. So reiterating what I said before, in most cases, companies are growing at 60 kilometers per hour, while the security team is trying to keep about 45 kilometers an hour. So over time, the distance will just get bigger and bigger until there is a security breach, and then everything comes unraveling. So this would be my key takeaways.
That's brilliant. And do you mind if we ask your opinion on one thing? Is something that we ask all of our guests, and that's for them to perhaps share an analogy that they use with some of the C-suite that they engage with, because we find that with security leaders and technology leaders, somewhat of a challenge for them to build relationships with and influence C-suite. So what analogy would you perhaps use to bridge that gap between the technical and non-technical when you're trying to influence the C-suite? We see a lot of individuals use the house and the moat or car as an analogy. But what would be your approach?
Yeah, great question, because this whole story I've been talking about how fast the business is growing versus how fast the security is growing. That is the exact analogy that I've used for my exec team and for our security strategy here at Beekeeper. So we have this one-line strategy that is very simple, and that is security team has to move in line with business growth. Yeah. So every year when we reevaluate our investment, reevaluate our security strategy initiative, this needs to account for what are the other investments we're making in the business, how much business is growing, and that needs to reflect on how much we are planning to invest in the security for next year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Fantastic.
And for our audience, if they want to reach out to you, Kewal, what's the best way for them to perhaps contact you?
Firstly, thank you very much, guys, for giving me this opportunity to come to this platform and then share my thoughts. And perhaps the most easiest way is through my LinkedIn.
Well, listen, Kewal, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you and the community and all our listeners. We trust you found some value in today's session. And to continue the discussion for a more sustained engagement, we also invite you to join the Secure Cyber Connect community platform. We offer a range of collaborative solutions for both technology and security professionals at no cost. And this includes expansive community access, cross-sector mutual mentoring, weekly online networking sessions, and a range of exclusive interviews, podcasts, and masterclasses.